The bulk of what's left to do, coding-wise anyhow, is have a game start screen, which will just be another scene from where we can load the main game scene that we've been working on this whole time. And we'll also set up a restart manager script so that we can quickly restart the game once it's game over. So the first thing we'll do is create a new scene. We'll call it proto start. So we'll go to File, New, and grab a new scene. We'll save scene as, here in our scenes folder, we'll call it proto start. Click save. And before we actually establish this scene, what we're going to want to do is first copy the background game object, as it'll be pretty much the same with this scene. So Control C on the background and paste that in. And as you can see here, we're going to need to readjust our camera a bit so it's just like it was with our other scene. So just follow along with these changes. Can't remember what the color was. It doesn't really matter because you'll never see this. So I'm setting it to that anyways. And the size is 3.6. Now, I also want to create a splash screen with some game info and have a blinking press enter. So we'll have those game objects. So move the main camera up there. Create a game object and let's call it splash. And we'll also have an enter game object. So for these, we're going to need to import some more assets. Let's actually make a new folder. Call it game start. And we'll import these assets. So game over. Instructions, which will be our part of our splash screen, and press enter. So for the splash screen, we'll create a sprite renderer, and drag that there, set that to the background layer and make sure it's on top. So put order and layer to 1. And I'll try not to forget to individually set the attributes for each image. But right now, I just want to set these up, these game objects. So this is going to need a sprite render as well. And to make sure it's above the splash screen, let's put on the second order and layer. And it's got to be at minus 3.05, I guess is best. And to get the press enter to blink, let's attach a script. So let's create a game start manager. Again, we'll create a folder called game start and create a new script. Let's call it game start manager. Oh, I didn't remember to change the asset attributes. So for images, let's go here, point, and on the enter as well. Where were we? We were in the game start, creating a game start manager. All right, so to get this enter image to blink, it's actually going to be really simple. So let's create an integer field called loop timer, and in start, initialize that to 1, And in update, we'll just have a conditional if loop timer, use the modulo 30 is equivalent to 0. We will use get component here to get the sprite render for the image. We'll return that to a local sprite render reference. We'll call this press enter renderer. We'll say press enter renderer dot enabled equals, we'll flip this, press enter renderer dot enabled, not press enter renderer dot enabled, which would be the opposite value of what it previously held. So loop timer plus plus to increment it, and we'll want to then assign that to the enter game object, right? And perhaps the most important thing you'll learn in this lesson is how to load another scene. Loading the main scene once we hit the enter key, you can implement that with this in the update. If input dot get key down, key code return key, we'll call this method called load level from the application class. It's a static method that does exactly what it says. So we'll load the scene, which is proto scene, right? All right, and then another thing we'll want to do is just attach a music loop for our intro screen, for a start screen. So just put on the so we'll actually import a new asset, music loop 0. We'll put that, sure, why not, on the main camera. And we'll have it loop and play on awake. And it's a bit loud. I made it a little bit too loud, so I'm going to put it to 0.4 for volume. We're actually not going to need this game object because we'll never see it on the start screen, so just delete that. And in order for this method to work properly, we need to set up our scenes in our build settings. So go to File, Build Settings, and we'll add this current scene. We'll also want to add this scene. So going back to proto start, and now I'll run this. All right, now in the main scene, we'll want to create a game over game object and parent it to the main camera. Call it game over. And we'll want to attach the game over sprite to this, so we'll need a sprite renderer. And we'll put that, let's put that on the enemy layer, and let's just make it order, I don't know, a large number just to make sure it's going to be above all the enemies. And since we normally don't want to see the sprite, we'll just default it to a opacity of 0. Oh, since we're on the main camera, I have to put the Z property for the position to 1, or else it'll end up behind everything because the main camera is on -10 for the Z property. So put that to 1. And yeah, so we're going to want to lerp this when it's game over. So normally we want the opacity set to 0. Now we'll want to create a game over manager script that will be attached to the game over game object to handle this lerping and so on. Add a new script. Game over manager. We'll have a sprite renderer field called game over renderer. Could do this locally, but we'll just local to the method, the update method, but I'll do it as a field here. And we'll say public static bool is game over to handle that game over state, whether or not we are actually whether it's game over or not. And we'll initialize the renderer, the game over renderer here. We'll just get the sprite renderer for this game object. And here we'll say if is game over, which we'll determine elsewhere. Maybe you can take a guess as to where we determine that. We'll do that shortly. Say game over renderer dot color. We'll do a color lerp. Color dot lerp from the game over renderer's current color to this color. 255. We're just interested in opacity changing, so 255, 255, 255, and we'll lerp it not quite all the way. It'll have some transparency to it still, so 80% of the way to 255. That's what 0.8 would represent there, and then we'll do it with this kind of multiple, that rate. Now let's parent a restart game object to the game over object to handle the restart logic. So call it restart. And here we will want the press enter. Again, we'll put on the enemy layer. Let's put on that order and layer. And we'll want it near the bottom of the screen, just like with the start section. And normally it will be turned off, because again, we don't want to see that under normal conditions. 999. What we can do is we can just reuse the game start manager here for this logic. So what we'll do is we'll enable the script only when it's actually game over. So when the is game over bool is true, then it will launch this script and it'll restart the game. So it's kind of handy functionality there. So we can enable this back in the game over manager by referencing the script. Say get component. We'll want the game start, or actually get component children, because we're going to access that restart game object as a child to where the game over manager script is attached to the game over game object, in other words. So get component in children, and I'll want the game start manager. All we want to do is enable that script, right? So first we're getting this reference, and it's going to be a game start manager. We'll call it restart. And we'll just say restart dot enabled equals true. Simple. And I'll just run this logic where when we hit return, it'll reload the scene. All right, so the last thing we'll need to do is set the isGameOver bool to true. So where do you think is a good place to do this? Where we're being eaten, right? Of course. So let's go to sphere controller, and right here we just reference that static field from the GameOver manager. So just say GameOver manager dot isGameOver equals true. All right, and it'll set that all into motion, what we just coded up. All right, so let's see what happens when we run this. So this is a bit strange. Why is this happening? Well, actually it's something really subtle that nonetheless has an impact on how we look at the rest of our scripts. What's happening here is when we restart the game start manager loads the level. So it just executes each script's start method first, and then goes through calling all the updates on each frame and moves along just as it normally would. But perhaps you recall that some of our fields were assigned values at the class level and not in the start method. They were initialized at the class level. That means these values are set when the scripts and their instances are first loaded into memory. But this is going to be before start is even called, right? So when we reload the game, it doesn't actually kill or destroy those script instances in memory. It just holds on to them because they're still being used. The result is those values are retained between loading scenes, specifically the ones that are initialized at the class level instead of in the start method. So in this case, the culprit is the isGameOver equals false bool that we set here. Now you may or may not want this depending on what reloading the level or loading the next scene means in your game. But in our game, we just want everything to reset from a convenient starting point. So we have to make sure all of our values that might change during our game are initialized in the start rather than at the class level, and therefore reinitialized when we load the level or the scene again. So let's change all the relevant class level variables in our project that could cause problems. So I'm just going to go through them one by one. All right, we got the speed, that will definitely be changing. It's not constant. This is a constant, so we don't have to worry about that. So let's put speed initialized here. This may or may not cause a problem, so we'll put that here. And the sphere controller, same thing with speed. Spawn interval is not a constant, but it doesn't change, we know that, so I don't have to worry about that. So let's say speed equals that, initialize it there. Might as well put the timer here. And here as well. And yeah, that should be pretty good. So now we should no longer have that problem. All right, so probably the most important thing you learned in this lesson was how to load a scene from another scene. Doesn't matter if that's from a start screen or a level, one level to another, or a cutscene. It doesn't matter. The process is pretty much just like this. All right, so that's it for this lesson. I'll see you in the next one.